But first, I'm joined on the line by child sex abuse survivor Sam Hill. Hi, Sam. Welcome to the Politics Show.
Hi, Tony. Hi.
First of all, what's your reaction to the news this week that Ben Emmerson, the leading lawyer in the inquiry, has first of all suspended and then he's decided to resign?
Well, there's not much transparency regarding what really is going on, but I've spoken to a few survivors, Esther Baker, and a few people I know, and they're quite glad to see him go. They didn't think he was really good for the job.
But he's been there for the last 2 years doing this, and we've seen a whole succession of various chairs of this inquiry disappearing, really, as they're appointed. We've had, first of all, Baroness Butler-Schloss and Fiona Wolf, both of who were connected to Leon Britton and the era where Leon Britton, former Home Secretary, was supposed to have covered this up back in the 1980s. And then there was Lowell Goddard. She was removed as well. She's now back in New Zealand, but nobody's really quite sure why she left. And now we've got this person, Alexis J. Yeah. So, I mean, I said at the top of the hour just there about whether you think this is being derailed deliberately. Do you think there's any chance that this will succeed, this inquiry?
Well, eventually the people keep dropping out. One or two of the bad ones will go, and perhaps, something more will develop, something better, because, maybe he was the problem, and maybe we'll actually have somebody who'll stick with the job now.
Well, what's your own thoughts about this whole thing, which was floated really at the time that Alexis J. was appointed and Lowell Goddard left, which is the idea of employing a whole load of civil servants from the Home Office in this job?
No, that doesn't seem very satisfactory, does it? Because these institutions themselves are going to be under the spotlight, and there'll be massive claims of people wanting to get insurance. So they're going to want to safeguard that, aren't they? They're working for them.
Now, one of the main things that the Home Office does, of course, is it oversees the police, and it does things like administers cuts to the police at the moment. And so the police, what's your thoughts about the way the police have dealt with these claims over the last 40, 50 years even?
Well, I think they're very status-orientated, and they're very much sort of tipping their hat to people who, they fear sort of condemning or bringing to justice, and they've been told not to bring them to justice, haven't they? So it's very easy for them then to sort of scoop up the remains of whoever comes to them and divert them very often away from justice. So I think it's reputation management a lot of the time within the institutions. On one side, they want to uphold the reputations of the powerful. On the other side, if someone's been vulnerable in care or any other system, mental health system or anything, they can use that to stigmatise and steer them away from justice. And they can actually, manipulate the records rather than dealing with huge amounts of paperwork, which they'll be dealing with now in the inquiry regarding all the things that they've covered up. If they can steer people away, as they did in Rotherham, by saying, we don't want to handle these people, they're the wrong sort of people making these accusations, they will do that, and they have been doing that.
There's another side to this, of course, since if someone is appointed to run the inquiry, one would have thought it was taken as read that they could decide who to employ as their staff and who they trusted, because these staff are going to be dealing with a massive amount of confidential paperwork, etc. And if the person running the inquiry doesn't trust their own staff, that might be a problem almost from the word go.
Yes, it would be a huge problem, yes. I don't know how it could be resolved.
And what's your own experience been with the police, who, let's just remind listeners, I mean, the Home Office is intimately connected with the police, over the years. If you could just tell us what your dealings, times you've been to the police and how you've been dealt with.
They were very dismissive because of the people I was made accusations towards. They were dismissive because of their status and the fact my status had been set quite early on in life, and I'd suffered emotionally and sort of been vulnerable, and they looked upon that as some sort of reason not to bother, really. Now,
I know you were initially sexually abused when you were around about 11, 12 years old. When did you first decide to actually talk to the police about all this?
I wanted to talk to the police at one point when I was 16, but that's when everyone closed ranks against me, and I was steered towards mental health as if I was, something wrong with me.
So let's just get this clear. You were threatening to talk to the police about the abuse, and then your abusers kind of managed to get you sectioned, is that right?
Well, yes, and my family closed ranks, and they all moved house. They weren't Nobody was prepared to deal with it. I was always the problem. I was seen as the problem. But unfortunately what happens then is the state will continue seeing you as the problem very often, because what they have written about you, what they have decided about you, carries on. You can't go back and say, I am not, what you've written on your record about me is not true. They write these records about people, and it's used, in a way to sort of defer you away from any form of civil justice.
Now, I suppose one of the main backstops when any kind of sexual abuse happens is the parents. Just tell us a little bit about what happened with your own parents when you spoke to them.
They were very young. They weren't keen to discuss any of it. I was always told to move on with my life, forget it, turn around, don't look back, sort of thing, which really isn't possible, because sooner or later it will rear up again and the memories will return.
But aren't you tempted to do that now, to just say, look, I've had enough of this?
To gain some sort of justice, you mean, to be...
Well, no, I mean to just say, look, I mean, it's a really terrible trial to go through at the time, this abuse, but then to have almost every time that you are trying to get something done about it, it's almost like a kind of another form of abuse. It
is. The records that they make on you, once you are known to the authorities, you may not have done anything wrong, but you may have had mental health problems, you may even just be vulnerable, you may have been homeless, your status is always sort of questioned. And these people that who were involved in the abuse, their status would never be questioned because they were completely above being questioned.
Now, I know you were in a situation at one time where you were actually forced really back with your abuser because you were homeless. Tell us how that happened.
I was forced. Oh, yes, indeed. He and I were living together. I was controlled by him into my mid-20s. Sadly enough. But, I mean, he had used the authorities against me, my mental health history. I had a breakdown at 19 and managed to pull all sorts of strings. And I tried to run away from him, went to stay in a hotel in my hometown. And they said to him, she's gone. Do you want us to call the police and bring her back? And eventually I was. They caught up with me on the motorway and brought me back to him. So I couldn't escape.
Well, that sounds pretty horrific. Yeah. But what about your more recent contacts with the police? Because I know after the Jimmy Savile scandal, I mean, this sort of rears its head, it seems, every few years or so. What was your latest experience with the police? Just take us through that.
Yes. I approached them about 7 or 8 months ago in reasonably good faith because I thought times have changed, and I'd managed to build up my self-esteem, being around a very nice group of people, making positive progress with the CSA campaigning, only to be brought back to square one again, to where I was all those times before when I'd made complaints and tried to go to the police. I was waiting for 6 months. They had hardly any contact with me until I spoke to Esther Baker, who told me, that you should be getting updates every month. Oh, well, that's not been happening. There's something wrong here. I'd been talking to Exaro, and they said, well, look, shall we ring them on your behalf, find out what's happening? I was just told just to sort of wait because I didn't want to seem like I was pushing them. So eventually I contacted them. It was almost 6 months after my first police interview, and they said, oh, well, it's been dropped. It was dropped 4 weeks ago, and no one had told me. There wasn't somebody extra working on the case as they'd told me there would be. There was actually somebody reviewing me, going over all my medical notes, and just dismissing my evidence, not interviewing anybody, and no one had told me.
So what's your experience to be almost like treated as the perpetrator rather than the victim again?
Yeah. Well, you just get stigmatised by the state, and it's very useful. I think abusers probably realise this in a way, that they have the advantage, they have more power in society, and you're going to spend a lot of years, recovering. So, if you can't break away from them, a family who are complicit and people like that, then you're going to be held down, basically, and the state will carry on that as well.
Now, I noticed earlier on 5 Live on the BBC, lots of suggestions that this inquiry should be shut down. What do you think?
No, I don't think it should. I think we've got to keep going. I think we really need to keep going, and there really need to be some legal changes made, like mandatory reporting, and the Official Secrets Act not being used to protect powerful paedophiles. So many changes need to be made. We haven't had really any progress. We need something. Otherwise, people are going to get very, very disheartened.
Now, Martin Summers, I was just bring you in here because Sir Peter Heyman, he was the deputy head of MI6, the Foreign Intelligence Service. He was one of the people who was implicated in this paedophilia, but many of these people have died. And is it actually impossible for the state to investigate itself?
Well, it shouldn't be. I mean, in theory, the police are supposedly independent of the intelligence services, although often they're not. And my suspicion is that the intelligence services have used abuse as a tool to blackmail various people at the top of society to make sure that they do what they're supposed to be, do as they're told, and that this is really underlying all of this. That you've got the general power imbalance, which has been mentioned. Which is obviously, a big issue in this kind of case, but I think also the state itself has used child abuse as a tool. So Kincora Boys Home in Northern Ireland, it's a big issue over there. MI5 were using it as a place to blackmail targets who were they would be filmed having sex with underage boys and then blackmailed subsequently. And I think that this is the reason why the state's so paranoid about all this coming out, because it's it shows the dark side of what they do.
Well, I would use the word afraid, not paranoid. I mean, they've got every right to be afraid, because you're talking about effectively a criminal cover-up. What's your take on this whole idea of using Home Office staff to run this inquiry?
Well, what it looks like from the outside is that they're using this kind of investigation and inquiry in order to try and basically cover their backsides. That's what British inquiries generally do, and I don't think we should give up on inquiries, but on the other hand, you've got to recognise that the strategy of inquiry from the point of view of the state is to make this stuff go away, or at least put it on the back burner. It's not to get to the bottom of it, but it's up to everybody else to make sure that the inquiry doesn't do that.
Also, how far high up do you think this goes? Because, I mean, I mentioned the royal family, but, Jimmy Savile was very friendly with them. They were also involved in the cover-up in Jersey in making sure that the abusers, both sexual and abusers in the mental health, that is putting people who are mentally ill in solitary confinement for long periods of time, that they were allowed to keep their jobs.
Well, if as I suspect, that child abuse is not just a random thing, but has actually been used as a tool by the intelligence services to blackmail various top politicians and others, then that will be the bottom line. They don't want it to come out because they'll have gone out of their way to encourage this kind of behaviour, so that those engaged in the behaviour can be subsequently blackmailed.
Now, in a couple of weeks, we're going to be looking at the anniversary of the Dutroux scandal in Belgium. So it's not just Britain. It may even be that this is going on in many countries, and Britain is just the only country that's grappling with it, trying to deal with it.
I'm afraid the idea of using sex with underage people as a means of blackmailing. A means of blackmail is it's just one of the tools of the trade of the secret services, whether British or anybody else. And I'm afraid that's probably what we're going to find if we get to the bottom of this. Although whether we will ever get to the bottom of it is another matter, because, of course, there's a lot of vested interest to prevent that from happening.
Bit by bit, of course, though, the information is trickling out about who's just talking the talk and who's actually walking the walk as part of this child sex abuse inquiry. Sam, can I ask you what your thoughts are about what should happen next, and whether you think that that Alexis Jay, who's in charge of this inquiry now, after Lowell Goddard, it looks as if was bullied out, whether she's the right person for the job?
I think we've just got to give her time, and something has to start happening, really. Then we can judge whether it's working or not.
What about the way that Lowell Goddard was removed? Have you followed any of that? Because I certainly saw that there were rumours that effectively she was elbowed out because she was not happy with Ben Emerson, who's now, of course, gone.
Yes, that's interesting. Will we ever know? It's all shrouded in secrecy. And, she said she missed her family. Would she have ever really taken the job in the first place if she was going to miss her family? And
we were about to find out what it was all about at the Home Affairs Select Committee when suddenly Keith Vaz is caught in some kind of sting operation, the chair of that committee, and disappears off the face. Well, he certainly wasn't a chair of the committee anymore. What if you were in the Home Secretary's position, Amber Rudd, at the moment? What would you be up to, Sam?
Oh, that's a difficult question. I think I would be listening to survivors. I think we're the ones with the knowledge, and we have really been stigmatised, and it's just, it's sort of endemic of what we've experienced throughout, and we need to be listened to. We're not these emotional people who are going to get it wrong. We would actually get it right. We want to point people in the right direction regards what happened and what went wrong.
And in your own case, could you just explain to us the way you understand that the establishment was able to protect your abusers rather than to prosecute them?
I think it's sort of just the workload that they fear, the workload of actually, dealing with things. It makes it much easier just to keep the status quo. If someone's vulnerable, we'll keep them in that position. We won't rock the boat by sort of giving them their full rights and encouraging them to take action and helping them find proof, etc. They just keep the status quo, and they follow the orders and the instructions they get from higher up. And basically, it's they process people and stigmatise people frequently. But I just don't know how it can really be changed. But it's the whole ethos of our institutions really needs a bit of a looking at.
Well, I think it's to be you're to be commended for carrying on the fight, and I think there has been a sea change in understanding that this is the sort of thing that goes on. I mean, a few years ago, if you'd said that senior people in this country were involved in child sex abuse, it wouldn't have rung true to many people. But of course, with all the revelations about Jimmy Savile and so on, people are now more aware of the issues. So it's one step forward, two steps back, isn't it?
Yeah.
But we've got to carry on because future generations require this to be sorted out so that it's put a stop to.
Sam, I know you're on Twitter. How can people follow your stuff? And I know you've also written a book too.
Yes, I'm Sam Hill 121212 on Twitter, and I've written a book called An Oath to Hell, which was my oath being thrown to hell by all the institutions and never being able to go to court, and and the Hippocratic Oath being broken. So it's really quite a prominent book. It describes the institutions and my dealings with them, really.
And what's your thoughts about what the best next steps are in the national inquiry?
Well, we need to start taking evidence and making a bit of progress. Nothing really has been done, has it? I think it just needs to really sort of get into the right mood for moving forward. And, maybe when it gathers pace, people will be more inclined to have a bit of faith in it. Well,
one good thing is that this business with Ben Emerson and with Lowell Goddard and various other people involved in the inquiry who have been removed from it does seem to be sorting the sheep from the goats, if I can put it like that. That is the people who are sincerely interested in the interests of the survivors and those who are kind of there going through the motions. So anyway, that's at least one thing positive, even though it's another problem, is that people are slowly learning who it is who's serious about making this inquiry work and who isn't. Mm-hmm. So, Sam Hill, thanks very much for joining us on the Politics Show. Now, Martin, can you just sum up your thoughts about what you think the prospects are for this inquiry succeeding or not at the moment? I was actually really annoyed to hear the national media talking about saying that this inquiry should be finished and maybe that's it. It's just never going to work and everyone should just forget about it. That's what they were saying on the BBC earlier on today, suggesting anyway.
Well, at one stage there was a suggestion that the inquiry should not include Northern Ireland and should not include Kincora Boys' Home, and the suggestion was that shouldn't be included because Ireland wasn't part of the jurisdiction of the United Kingdom, which, if you think about it, is a rather strange argument for the British to make, since it basically accepts the Republicans' allegation that, or not allegation, the Republicans' demand that the six counties shouldn't be part of the UK. But anyway, they have included it, and I think there is evidence to suggest that there's a pattern involved in all of this, especially at the highest levels. And I think if you think about it, the culture of the British intelligence services, particularly MI5, MI6, tended to be a gay culture, for example. At one stage, a lot of gay men were working there. And, of course, for many, many years, gay sex was illegal in this country. So there were a kind of... Because gay sex was illegal and many of MI5, MI6 officers were gay, they generally just started to disregard that kind of aspect of the law. But at what point does having sex with underage... and the age of consent was 21, and so people will be having sex with people under 21 and thinking, well, that's all right, there's nothing the matter with that. But how low, the whole culture of permissiveness around that allowed this kind of culture to develop. And then, of course, you've got the use of sex, illicit sex, as a means of blackmail. And that's pretty much what appears to have been happening at the King Cora Boys' Home. Now, we know about the King Cora Boys' Home, that there's also suggestions that children's homes in North Wales and other parts of the country, if you were a secret service that wanted to use children as sex objects to blackmail politicians and others, then you would go to children's homes.
Martin, the survivors group at Shirley Oaks, which has been very vocal recently, which is in South London, they have been saying effectively when the people that they were going to report sexual abuse in care were themselves paedophiles.
Well, that's right. So what you've got is a whole. There's probably they've got to distinguish a paedophile subculture within things like care homes, which is and wherever people paedophiles we know are quite devious at getting access to young people. But, of course, the VIP paedophiles, what we're talking about here, Andy Heyman, it wasn't Andy Heyman, I've forgotten his name, he was second in command of MI6, and he was found, some stuff was found on a bus, photographs, he'd left them on the bus, the police went round to him and said, well, what's all this about? But he was let off. And I think that the culture of paedophilia is ingrained in the intelligence services.
I mean, it would be okay, wouldn't it, if it was just, say, one institution, but it seems as if it's systematic, where you've got social services, police all covering up and nobody able to... If you're going to have a systematic programme of encouraging child abuse for political reasons, then you're going to have a pretty substantial cover-up operation ready to go. And don't forget, we're talking about people who are, trained intelligence officers who know how to cover their tracks and who know how to pull the right strings to get the results they want. OK, before we leave the subject, let's just have a listen, because there's no Prime Minister's questions during the conference season, but this was put a couple of weeks ago, and about the end of Lowell Goddard chairing the child sex abuse inquiry by Lisa Nandy.
Lisa Nandy.
It's been 2 years since the Prime Minister set up the child abuse inquiry. It's on to its fourth chair, and last week the outgoing chair said that it had become inherently unmanageable. Since the Prime Minister appointed Dame Lowell Goddard to her position, will she insist that she comes before this House to explain herself? Surely child abuse survivors deserve an explanation.
Well, first of all, on the process point that she's raised with me, of course, it's not for the Prime Minister to insist who attends before a committee of this House. I understand Dame Lowell Goddard has been invited to attend the committee. But what I would say on the child abuse issue is I think she and I share across this House, many honourable members, a desire to see these issues of these appalling crimes of child abuse being properly looked into. It's important that the inquiry, Dame Lowell Goddard has set up the inquiry, the Truth Project, many aspects of this which are already in place and operating. And I'm very pleased that Alexis Jay has taken on the role as chairman of the inquiry. She chaired the Rotherham work. I think she will do this work extremely well, and we will have answers to questions that so many have been asking for too long.
Well, one thing that the Prime Minister didn't say there was that Alexis Jay didn't actually recommend any kind of disciplinary action on any of the social workers or police that allowed this abuse to go on in Rotherham for something like nearly 15 years, with thousands of offences, many of which, of course, were reported to the police, but without any action.
Well, in other words, the suggestion is that the British are trying to cover things up by using their inquiry system and all the rest of it. Well, that goes without saying. We could say, well, let's not have an inquiry at all because it's going to be a cover-up. We've got to work with what we've got and keep banging away at it.
Well, I don't think that's going to happen, because there are some people who are pretty determined to make sure this inquiry does work and that anybody that's trying to obstruct it is removed from the actual organisation of that inquiry. So we'll see what happens in future weeks.
Celebrating diversity, this is Bristol's BCFM 93.2.